Hello, my name is Ryan. I'm 35, and I work as a project manager at a mid-sized tech firm. My wife, Laura, is 32 and works as an account executive at a high-profile advertising agency. For 6 years, I believed we had a perfect life. Sure, we had our arguments. Everyone does. But Laura and I always seem to find our way back to each other. Or so I thought. Lately, something about Laura has been off. It's subtle at first. She starts staying late at the office more often, her phone becomes glued to her hand, and our conversations feel shallow, like she's just saying what I want to hear. I tell myself it's just the stress of her job. After all, Laura's boss, Patrick, is notorious for being demanding, throwing last-minute assignments her way, and calling at all hours. Still, the doubts creep in. The first red flag came one Friday night. Laura and I had plans to watch a movie at home, something we hadn't done in a while. But just as I was setting up the TV, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression unreadable. "I'm so sorry, Ryan," she said, grabbing her coat. "Patrick needs me to go over some campaign notes." "It's late," I said, frowning. "Can't it wait until Monday?" "It's urgent," she said, avoiding my eyes. "You know how he is." I let it slide, but the seed of suspicion was planted. From that moment, I started noticing more and more inconsistencies. The late nights became more frequent, the explanations vaguer. And then there was the scent, a faint whiff of cologne on her clothes when she came home, one I didn't recognize. Work wasn't much of an escape for me either. My boss, David, is the kind of guy who thrives on making others miserable. He has this way of zeroing in on your insecurities and exploiting them for his own amusement. Every project I present is met with some sarcastic remark, every success downplayed. The stress of dealing with him on top of everything with Laura feels suffocating. And then there's his wife, Claire. Claire and David are polar opposites. Where he's cruel and controlling, she's kind and approachable. She often attends the company's social events, her elegance and warmth a stark contrast to David's abrasive demeanor. I've always admired her from afar, not in a romantic way, but as someone who seems to embody the grace I wish I had in my own life. It's at one of these events that Claire and I have our first real conversation. It's a corporate dinner, the kind where everyone pretends to enjoy themselves while secretly counting the minutes until they can leave. Laura was supposed to come with me, but she canceled last minute, again. "Something came up at work," she'd said, her voice strained. I didn't press her. I'm nursing a drink at the bar when Claire approaches, her expression soft but curious. "Ryan, right?" she says, extending her hand. "David's told me about you." I laugh bitterly. Hopefully not all bad. She smiles, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "David's not exactly known for being kind, is he?" We talk for a while, mostly about work, but there's an unspoken understanding between us, a shared weariness, like we're both trapped in lives we didn't quite sign up for. Claire mentions that she's been feeling distant from David lately, that his relentless focus on work has taken a toll on their marriage. I don't say much about Laura, but something about Claire's openness makes me feel seen in a way I haven't felt in months. The second red flag with Laura comes a week later. I'm cleaning up the kitchen when her laptop dings. She left it open on the counter, her work email still pulled up. I know I shouldn't snoop, but something about the message preview catches my eye. "Last night was unforgettable. Can't wait to see you again." My heart stops. The sender is listed as Patrick. I don't open the email, but the words are burned into my mind. I sit down, my hands shaking, replaying every moment of the past few months. The late nights, the canceled plans, the distant look in her eyes. It all makes sense now. I confide in Claire a few days later, not intentionally but in the heat of the moment. She stops by my office to drop off something David forgot, and when she asks how I'm doing, the words just spill out. "I think Laura's having an affair," I say, my voice hollow. Claire looks at me, her expression unreadable. "With Patrick?" I nod. I don't have solid proof, but yeah. She hesitates before sitting down across from me. "David's mentioned Patrick before. Well, let's just say he has a reputation." Her words are like a punch to the gut. "What should I do?" I ask, desperate for advice. Claire takes a deep breath. "You deserve the truth, Ryan. Whatever it takes, You need to find out for sure. Over the next week, I start paying closer attention to Laura's behavior. I track her late-night outings, noting the times and locations she claims to be at. More often than not, her stories don't add up. One night, she says she's at a client dinner, but when I call the restaurant to confirm, there's no reservation under her name. I start to feel like I'm losing my mind. The woman I've loved for years, the one I thought I knew better than anyone, is slipping away, and I don't know how to stop it. Claire becomes my confidant during this time. We text occasionally, mostly about work, but our conversations sometimes drift into personal territory. She tells me more about her struggles with David, how his controlling nature has eroded her confidence, how she feels trapped in a marriage that looks perfect from the outside but is anything but. In turn, I open up about my growing suspicions, my fears of confronting Laura and what I might discover. "You're stronger than you think," Claire tells me one night. "Don't let her make you feel small." Her words stick with me. For the first time in months, I feel a glimmer of hope, like maybe I can take control of my life again. The final straw comes one Friday evening. Laura is getting ready to go out, claiming it's another work event. As she's putting on her earrings, I ask, "Is Patrick going to be there?" She freezes for just a moment, barely noticeable, but enough for me to catch. "Why would you ask that?" she says, her voice too casual. "No reason," I reply, forcing a smile. "Just curious." She leaves shortly after, and I know in my gut that she's lying. I sit in the living room for hours, the weight of everything crashing down on me. When her phone buzzes on the coffee table, I glance at the screen. It's a message from Patrick, looking forward to tonight. My heart hardens. It's time to confront her. Laura didn't come home until after midnight, and when she walked through the door, the smell of alcohol and cologne hit me like a slap. She tried to slip into bed quietly, but I was already awake, staring at the ceiling. "How was the event?" I asked, my voice calm but laced with tension. "Fine," she mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "Tiring." She rolled over, and I felt the gap between us grow wider than ever. I lay awake for hours, my mind racing. I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. The late nights, the evasive answers, Patrick's messages, it all pointed to one conclusion. I needed proof. The next morning, Laura left early for a supposed brunch with her coworkers. As soon as she was out the door, I grabbed her laptop and started digging. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Her messages with Patrick were filled with inside jokes, compliments, and plans to meet up. But one email in particular stopped me cold. "Last night was perfect. Can't wait for round 2. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. There it was, the confirmation I'd been dreading. Laura was cheating on me with her boss. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, trying to figure out what to do next. Confronting her without a plan felt reckless, but pretending everything was fine was no longer an option. That evening, I texted Claire. "I found proof." She responded almost immediately, "Can you talk?" We met at a small park a few blocks from my house, away from prying eyes. Claire listened quietly as I told her everything, her expression a mix of sympathy and anger. "I'm so sorry, Ryan," she said when I finished. "You don't deserve this." Her words were comforting, but they didn't ease the ache in my chest. "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "If I confront her, she'll just deny it. And even if she doesn't, where does that leave me? Divorced and miserable?" Claire placed a hand on my arm, her touch grounding me. "You're stronger than you think," she said. "But you need to focus on what's best for you. Don't let her manipulate you into staying if that's not what you want." The following week, I started documenting everything. I saved screenshots of Laura's emails, tracked her late-night outings, and even took note of the times Patrick's car was parked outside our house. It felt invasive and wrong, but I needed leverage. If this turned into a divorce, I couldn't afford to be unprepared. Claire continued to be a source of support during this time. We met for coffee a few times, and our conversations drifted from my situation to hers. She confided in me about David's controlling behavior, how he belittled her in private while playing the perfect husband in public. "He's so good at pretending," she said one afternoon, stirring her cappuccino absent-mindedly. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone else sees what he's really like." "I see it," I said firmly, "and you don't deserve that." Claire smiled faintly. Thanks, Ryan. That means a lot. Meanwhile, Laura was oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. She carried on as if everything was fine, laughing at dinner, texting Patrick under the table, and offering me half-hearted kisses before bed. Her arrogance infuriated me, but I bided my time, waiting for the right moment to confront her. It was a Thursday evening when everything finally fell into place. Laura had left the house, claiming she had a late meeting with Patrick and a client. I wasn't naive enough to believe her anymore. With her phone buzzing on the counter, I took the opportunity to glance at the screen. A message from Patrick lit up, same hotel as last time. Room 214. I felt a surge of anger and heartbreak, but instead of confronting her, I decided to act strategically. I called Claire. Ryan, what's wrong? She asked, concern evident in her voice. It's happening tonight, I said, pacing the kitchen. I know where they are. Claire was silent for a moment. What are you going to do? I need to see it for myself, I replied. I need something concrete. Are you sure that's a good idea? She asked gently. This could be painful, Ryan. I have to, I said, the words catching in my throat. I can't let her gaslight me anymore. Claire sighed. Be careful, okay? That night, I parked across the street from the hotel, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't have to wait long. I saw Laura pull into the lot and head inside, glancing over her shoulder like she was afraid of being followed. A few minutes later, Patrick arrived, wearing the same smug expression I'd seen in his company photos. I followed them at a distance, staying out of sight as they made their way to the elevator. My stomach churned as I watched them disappear behind the closing doors. I couldn't bring myself to follow them to the room. I didn't need to see more. I snapped a photo of the two of them entering the elevator, their body language confirming everything I already knew. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced with a mix of fury and humiliation. By the time I walked through the door, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I called Claire again. It's done, I said, my voice hollow. I saw them together. Claire didn't try to offer empty reassurances. I'm so sorry, Ryan. What now? I don't know, I admitted, but I can't live like this anymore. She hesitated. Do you want me to come over? You shouldn't be alone right now. For a moment, I considered saying no, but the thought of sitting in my empty house, drowning in my thoughts, was unbearable. Yeah, I said finally. I'd like that. When Claire arrived, I was still sitting in the living room, staring at the photo I'd taken. She sat beside me, her presence warm and steady. You did the right thing, she said softly. You deserve the truth. It doesn't make it hurt any less, I said bitterly. She reached for my hand, her touch gentle but firm. No, but it's a step forward. You've been living in her shadow for too long, Ryan. It's time to take back control. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. Claire's words grounded me, giving me the strength to face what lay ahead. The confrontation happened the next day. Laura came home in the afternoon, her demeanor casual, as if she hadn't just spent the night betraying me. I was waiting for her in the kitchen, the photo of her and Patrick on the counter. What's this? She asked, her face paling as she picked it up. You tell me, I said, my voice cold. Laura stared at the photo, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. Ryan, I can explain. Don't, I interrupted. I don't want your excuses. I want the truth. She hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. It's not what it looks like. I laughed bitterly. Really? My back? Laura's composure crumbled, and she started to cry. Ryan, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. Don't insult me, I snapped. You don't get to destroy our marriage and then pretend it was meaningless. For a moment, she just stood there, sobbing. Then she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I'm done, Laura. I want a divorce. That night, I met up with Claire again. We didn't talk much. There wasn't anything left to say. But as we sat together in the quiet of my living room, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. I knew the road ahead would be hard, but for the first time, I felt like I wasn't walking it alone. The days following my confrontation with Laura were chaotic. She moved into the guest room, alternating between apologizing profusely and throwing blame my way. "You were so distant," she said one night, her voice laced with desperation. I didn't feel seen. Her words cut deep, but they couldn't pierce the wall I'd built around myself. "I wasn't distant, Laura," I said, my voice steady. "You just chose to look somewhere else." She fell silent after that, retreating to her phone in the comfort of Patrick's lies. But I was past caring. The divorce papers were already in motion, and every day brought me closer to the freedom I craved. Work was another battlefield. David caught wind of my personal troubles. How, I didn't know, but it wasn't surprising. He cornered me in the hallway one morning, his smirk as sharp as a knife. "Rough patch at home, Ryan?" he asked, his tone mocking. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "Not that it's any of your business, but yes." David chuckled, his condescension dripping. "Better get it together. We can't have you falling apart on the job." It took everything in me not to punch him, but I knew better. Instead, I walked away, his laughter echoing behind me. The rage simmered beneath the surface, a constant reminder of how powerless I felt. The only solace I found was in Claire. She became my anchor in the storm, offering a listening ear and a steady presence when everything else felt like it was spiraling out of control. Our conversations grew more personal, and I began to see her not just as David's wife, but as someone who truly understood me. One evening, after a particularly brutal day at work, Claire invited me over to her house. "David's out of town," she said, her voice warm. "Come by. We can talk." When I arrived, the house was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos in my mind. Claire greeted me with a glass of wine, her smile soft but knowing. "You look like you've been through hell," she said, leading me to the living room. "I feel like it," I admitted, sinking into the couch. We talked for hours, sharing stories of our frustrations and betrayals. Claire opened up about her own struggles, the way David's controlling nature had chipped away at her self-worth. "Sometimes I wonder who I'd be without him," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "You'd be incredible," I said without thinking, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "You really think so?" "I know so," I said, my voice firm. The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. It was charged, filled with things neither of us dared to say. And then, without warning, Claire leaned in and kissed me. For a moment, I froze, caught between guilt and longing. But then I kissed her back, the weight of my emotions pouring out in that single act. It was reckless and wrong, but in that moment, it felt like the only thing that made sense. The next morning, the reality of what we'd done hit hard. Claire and I sat at her kitchen table, the weight of our actions hanging between us. "Ryan," she said softly, "I don't regret it, but we need to be careful." "I know," I said, my voice heavy. "This can't go any further." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Take care of yourself, okay?" I left her house feeling more conflicted than ever. What had started as a friendship forged in pain had turned into something far more complicated. And now, I was left to face the consequences. The divorce with Laura dragged on for months. Every meeting with our lawyers felt like a battle, with Laura fighting tooth and nail for every scrap of our shared life. She accused me of infidelity, though she had no proof, and used it as leverage to demand a larger share of our assets. "You're pathetic," she spat during one particularly heated negotiation. "You couldn't handle me, so you went running to someone else." Her words stung, but I refused to rise to her bait. "This isn't about me, Laura," I said calmly. "It's about your choices." In the end, I walked away with little more than my car and some savings. Laura got the house, but I didn't care. It was a shell of the life we built together, and I wanted no part of it. Work was no sanctuary either. David's taunts became more pointed, his disdain for me evident in every interaction. The tension reached a breaking point during a team meeting when he called out one of my ideas in front of everyone. "Ryan, do you even think these things through?" he sneered. "Or do you just throw something together and hope for the best?" I snapped. "At least I don't pretend to be perfect while tearing everyone else down." The room fell silent, all eyes on David. His face turned red, but he didn't respond. Instead, he dismissed the meeting and stormed out, leaving me feeling a mix of triumph and dread. As the months wore on, I began to rebuild. I moved into a small apartment across town, a quiet space where I could start fresh. I focused on work, determined to prove myself despite David's hostility. And though I missed Claire, we agreed to keep our distance. What had happened between us was a moment of weakness, not the foundation for something lasting. One afternoon, I ran into her at a cafe. She looked radiant, her confidence seemingly restored. "How are you?" she asked, her smile genuine. "Better," I said, and I meant it. We talked briefly, catching up on the small details of our lives. When we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of closure. Claire had been a lifeline during my darkest days, but now it was time for both of us to move forward. A year later, my life is far from perfect, but it's mine. I found a new job at a company where I'm respected, and I'm slowly rediscovering who I am outside of my marriage. The scars from Laura's betrayal are still there, but they've faded, replaced by a quiet resilience. Betrayal leaves its mark, but it doesn't define you. It's what you do after the fall that matters. And for the first time in years, I'm finally standing on my own. Goodbye.